I remember having conversations about Har HaBayis in Yeshivas Mir, and that did not go over well. Pro tip: if you're gonna learn this, keep it to yourself. And he gave me a psak to go. So at that point, I went up to Erev Yom Kippur. I went up to the first time, and it was like a life-changing experience. Years later, I was on the Har, and I saw the one of the people who learned on the same bench as me in the Mir on the Har. I'm like, you go to Har HaBayis? He's like, of course I go. I've been going for years. The truth is that the sugya of Har HaBayis is actually a very simple sugya. People make it out to be very complicated. It really is not.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shtark. Shtark is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a mentor in the workforce. As we enter the 3 weeks, I'm honored to welcome Rav Yehuda Levy to the podcast. Rav Yehuda works professionally in video production, formerly at Aish, also doing digital media and advocacy for international United Hatzalah. And in addition to all that, he is a Talmid Chacham. He learns, he teaches, and advocates for Yeshivas Har HaBayis, which is the main topic that we're here to discuss today. So, Rabbi Levy, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So before we jump in, a quick personal request to our listeners to please hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us grow the show and reach new listeners. So, Rav Yehuda, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, specifically how you ended up in the field of video production.
I grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey. I came to learn in Yisrael by the Mir. Grew up in a regular, typical American family. Aliyah wasn't necessarily discussed, but it wasn't necessarily anti either. It was just sort of, we're a typical American family. When I came to Yisrael, it was not something that I was like fully bought into. Oh, this is a place that every Jew needs to be at or needs to live here. But that changed as I continued to, spend more and more time here. And yeah, believe it or not, I have a background in audio engineering, and I worked on a bunch of different music projects. When I was single, once I was here in yeshiva, I ended up going back to America, got married, came back to Eretz Yisrael, and fast forward, I was in the Mir for 2 years. Then I joined Rabbi Kellerman's Kollel for 5 years, and right after I graduated, which is the middle of COVID, so there weren't many opportunities available. And so at that point, I had already gotten involved in Har HaBayis, and there was talk about amongst a bunch of people that we were looking to potentially create a kollel that learned on Har HaBayis. So I got involved with that and helped. I was one of the founding members of Yeshivas Har HaBayis and the kollel that was there. And helped effectuate a tremendous amount of change that exists today on Har HaBayis as a result of being part of the kollel and various different efforts that we did. But to answer your original question, right now I was looking for actual work that was going to feed my family, and I had volunteered as a tag agent. And, our family Rav was looking for someone who was savvy enough to be able to work as a tag agent. And he reached out to me, and I volunteered as a tag agent, and that was like late 2019, early 2020.
So for the listeners, a tag agent is someone who helps people get filters and other responsibilities.
Technology awareness group. So TAG is an organization that helps promote safe technology use, which includes installing certain filters. And one of the filters that we installed a lot of was for a company called TechLock, which is a brand new company at the time. Right around the time when K9 filter was sort of being discontinued, and that was like the free filter that everybody had used. And then COVID hit, and as I mentioned, I graduated, and I was looking for opportunities. And they put out on like the Tag Slack group that TechLock is looking to hire, because at that point the From world went from having nobody using computers, or a very small percentage using computers, to everybody needing Zoom classes. And they went from a very small customer base to a tremendous customer base in a very short period of time, and they just didn't have the infrastructure to deal with it. So they were basically begging anybody who had any sort of knowledge of their back end to that was willing to work for them. So I reached out and I said, hey, I'm looking for opportunities, and had a quick interview, and they brought me on right away. And I started there as level 2 customer support, quickly moved up the ranks to tech support, level 2 tech support, and then eventually earned enough trust that they promoted me to run the Tag Slack channel, the one that actually got me a job. And I was working there American hours, so I would come into the office at around 9 a.m. US time, which is around 4 p.m. here in Israel. And we worked till 2, 3 in the morning. It was crazy, just the amount of volume that we had. And I started implementing systems of automating different a lot of the questions were the same questions. So eventually I started using like the built-in screen recorder within Slack to explain how to do certain things. And then once I took over Tag Slack, which was a separate Slack account, meaning TechLock had their own internal Slack, but there was also Slack for Tag, where Tag agents are able to reach agents from within different filter companies that they install. Because let's say, for example, if I'm a tag agent and I'm installing your filter and there's an issue, I need to be able to reach you right away because like I'm doing you the favor by promoting your product. Like I can't sit here and wait to call to open a customer support ticket. So that was basically a backdoor channel and it wasn't exclusive to TechLock either. It was NetSpark, Gentech, any of these other companies would have direct access to an agent from that team. So became my responsibility and on the TechLock side of things. And there were a lot of questions that were just very easy answers. And I found that I just started making a whole bunch of videos explaining how to do this. So when someone would ask for a question, unless it was something that needed to be actually dealt with, I would just send them a video. And at that point, I approached my boss and I said, hey, this is a great idea. Like, we really need YouTube tutorials. Let's invest in it. But for whatever reason, they didn't want to do it at the time. And then Siyat Dishmaya, somebody from a company in Lakewood called Admire Pro reached out and he said, hey, we just acquired a new software called Admire Pro. It's a CRM-based software. And we are looking for someone to build an LMS, a learning management system. So reached out to me and said, "Hey, make YouTube how-to videos?" I was like, "Sure." That's exactly what I wanted to do. So I left TechLock, moved over to Admire Pro, and created a whole bunch of videos. And Baruch Hashem, I did that, and that's really where I got much more into the world of video production. And then October 7th happened, and as a United Hatzalah volunteer, I was down south pretty much for the month after. And while I was there, Rafi Pash, who at that point was the international spokesperson for United Hatzalah, reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, are you looking for work? Because we actually could use you. We have a lot of skill sets that we can use." And I Baruch Hashem took a job there. So I was first a volunteer there, and then became an actual working there. And I did a whole slew of things. And from there, I pivoted to also taking care of the podcast there. And that's really where I got like fully into the weeds of video production.
I want to transition to focus more on the HaBayit stuff because we're in 3 weeks now.
Mhm.
So, alongside this development that you're doing professionally, you also alluded to the fact that you sort of started to get involved in HaBayit. So, do you remember like the original exposure that you had, the original spark within
Sure.
you that led you down this path?
So, there's an old joke that it says that when someone puts on tcheles, uskartem es kol mitzvahs Hashem. And once you put on tcheles, you realize that there are a whole slew of mitzvahs that we're not doing. Just to take a step back, when I was in yeshiva, I was in the mirror. So, like I said, I didn't come from a place where living in Eretz Yisrael was like, something discussed. Definitely not in the yeshiva upbringing that I had, through the various yeshivas I was in America. But as I was in the mirror, I was learning in Rav Yehuda, and he went through the topic of tchelas. And that was a real eye opener. And after going through tchelas and starting to learn sugya, that opened me up to a path of really researching a lot of these topics that people like to dub geula topics. I just think they're just plain Torah topics because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And from tchelas, it led to learning the sugya of Yeshivas Yisrael and getting involved there. And then that also led to a lot of people in the same circles were also learning the sugya of Har HaBayis, and I started learning the sugya. It took me from the time I began looking into the sugya of tchelas roughly about 5 years till I actually put on tchelas. It was a talich, but as it became clearer and clearer, this was something that needed to be done. So I kept asking my rebbe, and I kept saying like, what's going on? Like, this is so clear. It's something that needs to be done. And eventually, my rebbe told me to speak to Rav Meltzer about it. And I spoke to Rav Meltzer, and Rav Meltzer gave me a psak to put on. And then from there, just learning the various things. I remember having conversations about Har HaBayis in Yeshivas Mir, and that did not go over well. Pro tip: if you're gonna learn this, keep it to yourself, especially in those type of yeshivas. But eventually, the more I learned the sugya, and it was clear to me that it was definitely mutter to go. The question is, should you go? And then there was a certain Yom and minion that I used to daven in when I was there. a few chaverim, and specifically Yossi Rabin was davening there, and he challenged me. He's like, you know that this is MS. Like, what are you doing? Why are you not doing that? So that I was doing Maris by a certain Rav I was learning at the time during my speaker program, and I went to ask that Rav privately after the next session, like about about Har HaBayis, and he gave me a psak to go. So at that point, I went up right Erev Yom Kippur. I went up for the first time, and it was like a life changing experience. And so from there, just continued to learn about it, continued to research it, and then as I mentioned, that's got to be around 2017, 2018, give or take. And then the more I got involved, and like I said, when it was right around COVID time when Yeshivas was founded, and had the chus to be involved in funding and bringing on Rav Elisha Wolfson, the mechaber of the Sefer HaBayis Kalacha, who up until that point was one of the Ramim in the Yeshivas Hesder at Tzfas, and he came on board as the Reish Kollel, and the yeshiva grew tremendously. I mean, I remember when we first started, we would go up to the Har for just mincha, like we would learn first Seder in Yeshivas Har HaBayis in Arzei Abira, and then we would have a Hasa'ah that would take us to the old city, and then we would go up to the Har for mincha. And at the beginning, we weren't even able to daven on the Har. We had to sort of to like whisper, maneuver, and at that point I had just gotten the brand new iPhone 11, and it had portrait mode on the camera. And I was taking pictures and was videoing because I had the background of doing the recording different shiurim for the kollel that I was in, Rabbi Kalman. And so I felt that it would be worthwhile to record shiurim or whatever, any discussions we were having on the Har. So I had the phone with me, and I was taking various pictures of the Har, and I took some nice pictures of some of the police officers, and I showed it to them, and they loved the pictures. They loved it. So I got their number and I sent it to them, and that started building very close relationships with many of the police officers that were on the Har. And as Shlomo Melech says, "K'mayim panim al panim," the more you treat people with respect, and that's the way they treat you back. And that led us to slowly but surely ease some of the restrictions, enabled us to eventually be able to daven. At first, we were able to daven without just standing in one place and just davening there for 10, 15 minutes. And that led to eventually to Chazar Sashatz, which eventually led to Berchas Kayanim, which eventually led to, freedom after freedom until we got to the point where Hishtach was allowed. And now today, it's a tremendous, it's night and day. How Har HaBayis was from when we started till where it is today. I mean, we definitely have a lot more to go, but it's night and day. And that gives me hope that we're going to continue to grow the freedoms there.
Right. So it's fascinating. And there's so many things that I want to ask you about this. So maybe just to start and just to be open up front for our audience, I've never been to Har HaBayis. Maybe this conversation will change that, but we're not really trying to convince me or anybody else. I just want to give the sugya its proper stage from someone who's spent a lot of time learning it. So maybe to start out, and I think this is like the first time I've ever used the word steelman. It's a good podcasting word, but we don't usually do these types of episodes. So maybe you could start, but I'm excited to use it, right? Can you start by steel manning the best possible, most generous possible explanation for those who say you shouldn't be going to Har HaBayis today?
Should or should not?
Should not. We'll get to your opinions in a
Sure.
moment.
I mean, it's no secret that many gedolei Yisrael, already from the times of Rav Kook, and then later in 1967 when the paratroopers captured Har HaBayis, many of the Rabbanim at the time told people to go off the Har. And it's hard to say if this was, the easy answer is that people were going on Har HaBayis. As soon as, in 1967, as soon as the paratroopers conquered the old city, the way they got to the Kaisel was to go on to Har HaBayis. Right? From their initial paratroopers to people visiting the old city until the roads were clear, and that took a few weeks. People were entering the old city through the Lion's Gate and making a left turn onto Har HaBayis. Maybe they didn't even realize they were going to Har HaBayis, but they were. They were working past the Dome of the Rock, and then alongside the western wall on the inside of Har HaBayis till they got to the Mughrabi Gate, and then down the steps to the Kaisel. You can read books about the time and people that visited at the time, and that's how they described the route they took. But people weren't careful, and people were definitely not knowledgeable, and people were going into the Dome of the Rock, which is clearly Machane Shechina. To quote Rav Avad Yosef, as he's quoted in Madane Melech, he writes, "Elu shenechnasim lo sholem dat, lo sholem chachma, ein chnasim b'meskad omer b'pnim, shu vadai makom ha'echal v'azara." Meaning, he was saying, what are the people are going to HaBayis? What are they like? They're not thinking clearly. They're going into the Miskad Omer Bifnim, meaning into the Dome of the Rock inside, which is for certain the location of the Hechal and the Azara. Now, anybody who knows the layouts of the Beis Hamikdash knows that there are three camps. There were to take before. Let me backtrack. So the Rabbanim at that point were very much against people going onto HaBayis because they were going to forbidden areas that all of us agree are forbidden. Even those that go up to HaBayis today agree that they were going into those forbidden areas, and therefore the easiest way to prevent that from happening was to write and tell people to go off the Har. Around that time, certain Piskei Teshuvos came out, Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Yosef, Rav Yashiv, and the like. I want to give the Rabbanim the benefit of the doubt, but they seem to me, based on everything we know of the sugya, and we're not getting fully into that right now, it seems to be like that it was sort of what I like to call a shoehorn pshat, where you need to come up with a certain maskana, so you basically, fetch the Torah or the tshuva in to make it fit. And again, chas v'shalom, we're not being pegay on any of the Greek gedolei Yisrael that were tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. And I honestly, if I was in their shoes, I'd probably do something similar, just because, the reason we needed the totzah of everybody off the Har, because when people were going into in places that carry a kares penalty, there's no question. But if we're being strict about halacha itself, what halacha states, right? Everybody would agree that it's not and when it comes to any halachic thing, we don't like decide that this is our maskana, and then we, like almost like the guy who gets the bullseye every time he shoots the arrow into the tree and then paints the bullseye around it. That's not going to help anybody. If a person learns the sugya, alibi the he goes through it properly from start to finish and comes up with a maskana that one should be off a HaBayis, say the Gemara. I respect it completely. On the flip side, if you're coming to the sugya with already the hanacha, with already your decision that HaBayis is forbidden to be entered into, and therefore you're building a halacha case backwards, that seems to be less of a strict halacha. Add that to the fact that many of the Seder Rabbanim who signed on the Kol Kareh to forbid entry to HaBayis, to personal Talmidim who learned the sugya, they gave psiskei halacha to yes go. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that it's usher to go, but then tell people that they could go. Now let's go back to the other side of the argument, just because for those who are not familiar of the sugya, I think we should give them a little bit of context. We'll do the elevator pitch version, because the truth is that the sugya of HaBayis is actually a very simple sugya. People make it out to be very complicated. It really is not. It starts like this. The pasuk says in Parashas Nosli, "Tzavas b'nei Yisrael v'shalchu min hamachane kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamil nopish." Three types of tumah: a tzaras, a zav, and a tamei meis. Okay. Now, when Am Yisrael were in the Midbar, they camped around the Mishkan in three camps. All right, there was Machane Yisrael, where all the Shvatim lived. Inside was Machane Levi, where Shevet Levi lived, and inside was Machane Shechina, where the Mishkan itself resided. Says Rashi on that pasuk in Parshas Nasai, which is really a Gemara in Pesachim that Pei Zayin Amud Beis, that you might think that all three types of tumah have to be sent out of all three camps. Says Rashi, no. And the Gemara says that as well. A Metzera was sent out of all three camps, right? Couldn't be in Machane Yisrael, Levi, or Shechina, right? As we know, the most famous person who was sent out of all three camps for getting tzaras was Miriam Anavia. She said Lashon Hara on her brother, Moshe Rabbeinu, and was afflicted with tzaras, and the Kohen said it was tamei. She had to be outside that Ananei Kavod. Due to her great stature, Am Yisrael didn't travel the time that she was outside that Ananei Kavod. But someone else who would have gotten the tzaras and wasn't as big, if it was time to travel, they would have to travel outside the Ananei Kavod. A zav, continues Rashi, a zav is allowed in Machane Yisrael, but not allowed in Machane Levi or Shechina. Okay, so someone who, let's say Levi, who became Tamei from Tumah Zav, would have to go out of Machane Levi, but they could stay in Machane Yisrael. And a Tamei Meis, says Rashi, and really the Gemara, a Tamei Meis is allowed in Machane Yisrael and Machane Levi, but just not in Machane Shechina. And the Psukim learned from there is that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a Levi, took the bones of Yosef with him inside Machane Levi. So they make a Kal V'chomer. If a Meis Atzma, if the dead body itself is allowed inside Machane Levi, for sure, someone who's Tamei Meis. So that's all good when Am Yisrael is in the Midbar. But what about nowadays? Says the Gemara in Zvachim Kuf Tet Zayin Amud Beis that Kashem Shemachana Bamidbar Kach Machana B'Yerushalayim. Just as there are camps in the desert, so there are camps in Jerusalem. Yerushalayim Har HaBayis, so the city of Jerusalem, up to the walls of Har HaBayis, Machana Yisrael. So if nowadays we would have someone who's Tameh from Tiras, which we don't, they would not be allowed in the city of Yerushalayim. Continues the Gemara, Har HaBayis L'Shar Nikner, meaning still very clear. Yerushalayim, Machana Yisrael. The Azara, Machana Shechina. Matches very much to what was in the Midbar and matches what was in Yerushalayim. So the problem is that we can understand that the area of the Azara was Machane Shechina, but until we can ascertain where the Azara stood on Har HaBayis, we would have to assume that Har HaBayis is at least a large portion of Har HaBayis is potentially Machane Shechina, and unless you have clarity where that is, you potentially risk walking into Machane Shechina, which carries a kares penalty. And to be clear, a zav that goes into Machane Leviyah does not carry a kares penalty; it carries only a lav. Now, I would never say that someone should be over a lav, chas v'shalom, but we can all appreciate the difference of severity between something that's a lav and something that's an iser kares. That being said, we still need to have clarity where the base of English stood on Har HaBayis, because if not, we are potentially entering into Machane Shechina. But if we were to have a place, a landmark, or something that we can identify with certainty was the location of something in the base of Mikdash, well, we have Mishnayos Midas, and Mishnayos Midas lays out the exact layout of Har HaBayis. It tells us exactly where things were, how long and how wide the base of Mikdash was to the Amma. Assuming we would know with certainty where the Makam HaMizbech is, or the Makam of the Kir was, or the Makam of the Duchan was, we would then be able to map it out using Mishnayos Midas. So it happens to be that one of the longest standing Masoros in Am Yisrael's history, from Chorban Ma'eh Sheni till today, is that the Dome of the Rock, that gold dome, the big building with a gold dome on it, stands over the location of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. This is well documented from Chorban Ma'eh Sheni till today. There's a very clear Masorah. There's a great sefer called HaMasorah Salmakom HaMigdash that literally goes door by door from Chorban Ma'eh till today. And many, we have Makaris throughout, especially once the Dome of the Rock was built. In fact, many of the Makaris suggest that the Dome of the Rock was built as a shul to say thank you to the Jews who fought with the Umayyads to drive out the Byzantines. And if you want, I have plenty of videos on YouTube that I go through a portion of those Makaris, or I wrote an article on BeisHashem.org where you can see tracing the entire Masorah in Hebrew and in English. Anybody could look it up themselves. Now that we have that identifying factor on Har HaBayis, the Dome of the Rock, right, which is the peak of the mountain, which matches exactly what the Gemara says, that Har Maria, the peak of Har Maria, is the Eben HaShasiyah, the location of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, where the Arna Bris was. And we have the Masorah that places that as the location of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, to quote the Radvaz, the Rebbe of the Arizal, and the Rebbe and a contemporary of Rebbe of Cairo, and the chief rabbi of Cairo, before he moved to Yerushalayim. He writes, Ein Safik, Shetachas HaKippa, Sham Tieh Eben HaShasiyah, Beli Safik HaNikra Etzlam Al Tzachra. That there is no doubt that underneath the dome, there lies the Eben HaShasiyah, without doubt that is called by them Al Tzachra, or the Tzachra building. And then at the end of the tshuva, he says, Ein Safek, there's no doubt, Shetachas HaKippa, that underneath the dome, Sham Tieh Eben HaShasiyah, there lies the Eben HaShasiyah, the foundation stone, She'alel Haya Yoshiv Aron Bebeis Kodesh HaKadoshim, that sat upon it the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. So now that we have that, and we know from Mishnayos Midas that the length of the Azara was 187 amas, and we know that the Kodesh HaKadoshim was to the west of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was 11 amas to the from the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the back of the Azara. So if we take from the Dome of the Rock building 11 amas to the west and 177 amas to the east, because we know it's 187 amas, and then north to south the Azara was north to south the Azara was 135 amas. So let's take 75 amas on each side of the Dome of the Rock, and you map that out and you close that area off. You now know where Machane Shechina is, at least Barach, and the rest of Har HaBayis is clear as the status of Machane Leviyah. Now, as long as a person prepares himself properly to go into Machane Leviyah, which means they have to purify themselves from Tumas Zav. What is Tumas Zav? Well, the Zav is a category of 5 types of Tumah. 2 of them that are male related and 3 of them that are female related. Zav basically means a flux or a flow. It means a tumah sheyatz min hakofah, a impurity that comes out from a person's body. For the man, for a man, that would be tumas keri, which would be his normal way of releasing semen, and then zav would be a abnormal way, which today is either prostatitis or gonorrhea. For a woman, that would be nida would be her normal way of having her period, and then an abnormal way would be considered ziva. However, ever since the times of the Gemara, we already have the Gemara in Nida, which says that Reb Zera didn't differentiate between Dam Nida and Dam Ziva, and therefore we treat every woman who has a flow or has her period to be considered a Zava Gedolei, and therefore she has to wait Zayin Akiyim before she gets rid of her Tumah. And then there's one additional category, which is Yeledes, which today again we treat as a Zav Gedolei anyway. So the way one gets rid of Tumah for all of those 5 types of Tumah, Zav, Zava, Nida, Yeledes, Keri, the only one that requires one to go to a Mayim Chaim would be a Zav, which is a male that has an abnormal discharge, again, gonorrhea or prostatitis. If a person knows that they have that, then they have to treat it as Zav, and therefore they have to wait Zayin Akim and then go to a spring, a Mayim Chaim. You can go to Lifta, you can go to Chamei Tveria, wherever one is considered a Mayim Chaim. The rest of the Tumas need a Zav, Nida, a Zava, a Yeledes, and a Keri just needs to go to a mikvah. Everybody who's married knows that their wife goes to the mikvah, generally once a month. It's not a big deal. It's not hard to go. The halachas are pretty straightforward. Going to a mikvah, dairais. The only thing for a man that's different is that you have to make a bracha, which is definitely, there's people for a loop the first time they have to do that. But because you're doing a tefillah for a dairais, you need to make a bracha. So again, the sugya to go to Har HaBayis is pretty straightforward. The arguments against going to Har HaBayis is primarily based on the words of the Gedolei, which were probably trying to prevent the isurim of people going to Har HaBayis. This idea that we don't know where the Beis HaMikdash stood on Har HaBayis, well, Rav Asher Weiss said it in a share, and I heard this from him directly. He said, anybody who says we don't know where the Beis HaMikdash stood on Har HaBayis today is a complete Am Ha'aretz in the sugya. It is clear, very clear, a very long-standing Messiah that is the location. So people make other arguments. They say, well, it might cause others to go shalei kalacha, and maybe it causes piguim, and maybe this, maybe it's not security, and for other reasons, and what really are we doing there? But all those, I think, are excuses. The real question is, the holy spot in Judaism, the spot that was set aside from the dawn of time, is the ultimate place of connection, of tefillah, of hiskarvos, of veikos, is the Even Shasiya. That is the location where Adam Rishon was created. That was the location where Adam brought a carbon after being kicked out of Gan Eden. That was the location where Cain and Hevel brought their karmanos. That was the location where Noach, after coming out of the teva, traveled all the way back to Yerushalayim to bring a carbon on that very Mizbeach. That was the location where Kedas Yitzchak took place. That was the location where Yitzchak and Rivka, when they didn't have children, davened according to Pirkei Rav Eliezer. That was the location where Yaakov Avinu, when he was running away from Esav, traveled back to Beisel, and there Kavtzal Makam, and he went to sleep, and he had the dream with a ladder, and he woke, and he said, Man Noira HaMakam, as the Inza came Beisel, came Zeshar Shabayim. This is the ultimate place, as the Medrash tells us. The gateway is always answered for tefillah to go through. And Shlomo Melech, when he built the Beis Hamikdash, Pesukim and Malachim, and in Divrei Yamim, talk about a whole tefillah that he said, that he begged Hashem that to guarantee that tefillah would always be answered there. And Hashem answers him, my eyes and my heart will be there for all days. And the Gemara in Masechtas Macha says that Mitchina leibana Shlomo HaBayis el al Tanai, that Shlomo didn't build the Beis Hamikdash only after receiving a guarantee from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shekol mi sheyesh leitzara yavav yispal aleho, that anybody who has any sort of need should go to that place and daven there. And the Gemara tells us numerous cases of people who had real needs, real tzrachim, whether they were missing things or they had a family member that was sick. They came to Har HaBayis and they went around Har HaBayis the wrong way, and people davened for them. And before they left Har HaBayis they already answered what their tefillah was answered. So there's so many things and so many reasons to go to Har HaBayis. But I think the ultimate question comes down to this. If we want Har HaBayis to be treated properly, why is there ire only on those who go kalacha? Right? You say that people are going shalei kalacha, right? But those people are going anyway. Meaning there's nothing stopping people, a tourist, a non-Jew, from going to Har HaBayis. And even if you were to stop all of those that go up to the Har Kehalacha, you're still going to have those people going Shalei Kehalacha. The only chance that we can have to save people from these Isurim, to save people and to teach people how to go properly, is because of people that go Kehalacha. And the more people that go Kehalacha, the more the experience becomes a a ruchnistic experience. There are tour guides who complain to the Rosh Hashiva of Elio Weber that people are going to. We used to go to HaBayis as a tour, but now you turned it into this davening and this learning, and it's long because the police make everybody go together. Like, so we stopped coming. So great. So now we're preventing the Yisr, right? How many times have I been at the entrance to the Har and I introduce myself to someone there? It's like, welcome. Is this your first time? Yes. Did you go to the mikvah? What's a mikvah? So I quickly explained the halachas to them, and then they went and explained where they could find the mincha and explained why it's a severe issue to go up to Har without going to the mikvah. Now, does everybody listen to me? No, but is there at least a chance? Yes. So coupling everything together, is it black and white? It's not going to be black and white. I mean, the ultimate sugya is black and white, that we know where the base of English Shtark and HaBayis. We know vadai where Machan Shechina is not, and therefore we can know what is Machan Leviyah, and Etamim Mace is allowed in there. And the rest of the reasons, so again, if someone wants to ask their Rav and the Rav says not to go to HaBayis, I respect that. But if you want to know, is the sugya as clear cut as people make it out to be, that kares, everybody goes, is doing terrible things and everybody's a reitzeach and a reidif, that's also not true. I think that the answer lives a little bit in the nuanced middle. We can respect the fact that the halacha, the sugya is clear, and you personally don't have to go. Now, I personally think that everybody should go, but that's my opinion. And my opinion is not required. Everybody's not required to listen to my opinion. But that's how I got into the sugya of Har HaBayis, and something I'm deeply passionate about, as you can tell. And
I love the passion, and it's great to hear. So I just a few other things that I wanted to touch on. I think you mentioned, like, so what are the deeper factors at play that maybe are under the surface of these conversations, these discourse, these decisions that everyone's making or not making. And so some of the things that I think about is, number one, people have a hard time changing, especially, people are strong in their Masorah and believe that, we shouldn't be changing too many things. That's number one. And number two is, within many swaths of the Torah world, being actively involved in bringing the Geula is not something that they subscribe to. So I wonder if you could talk to those 2 points.
first of all, both of those points are very valid, and I respect that, right? We have been, anti-change, and that has helped us stay true to who we are. But ultimately, you have to recognize that the change is to not go to Har HaBayis. I know that's counterintuitive to people because all they know for their lives is that we don't go to Har HaBayis. But if you really look through the history, Am Yisrael continued to go to Har HaBayis throughout the Galus, since the destruction of the base of English. Throughout the Tkufis HaTanoim v'Amirayim, Am Yisrael was going to Har HaBayis, to the point where one of the Tanoim had to make a bracha for saying Riv Yisrael on Har HaBayis, right? And now it wasn't so easy through every Tukufah. There were certain places where the government didn't allow them to go, but that is exactly it. The reason why people didn't go to Har HaBayis was not because there was any halachic problem, but in fact it was because that people were, the governments that were controlling Yerushalayim at the time didn't allow them to. And that was especially pronounced once the Ottomans conquered Jerusalem. During the Mamluk periods, and really from the Crusader period, there were large swaths of time where people weren't able to go to Har HaBayis. Although, interestingly enough, Rambam himself went on to Har HaBayis during the Crusader period in 1166, more than likely dressed like an Arab. But he writes, he actually made that day that he went to Har HaBayis a Yom Tov for the rest of his life and for his children as well, as he writes in as his words are quoted in Rekdama to Pirush Mishnayos the Rambam in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, and also quoted in the Sefer Charedim. But yeah, people continued to go to Har HaBayis, and then it was only during the Ottoman Tekufa where it was completely outlawed to non-Muslims to go to Har HaBayis, which again led to people stopping to go. But that wasn't because there's any halachic reason. So yes, once the doors reopened, people weren't knowledgeable in the halachas, the Rabbanim had to keep things in check. So if you really want to suggest that we are changing, the people that have really changed are those who say to not go to Har HaBayis. For most of our history, we did go to Har HaBayis, at least halachically.
And as far
And
as
then,
the human role in the Geula process,
since far in the human role in the Gula process is, well, again, with every area in halacha, we have a gemara, we have halacha, right? We have a way to be machriya. And when it comes to the sugya of the Geula itself, there's machlekes in the Gemara between Rav and Shmuel of how the Mesilas Mashiach look. And in Rav holds that the Mesilas Mashiach is a fantastic time. It's like it's full of miracles and things look differently, and the world changes completely. And Shmuel holds Ein bein Yimei Mashiach el Shibud Malchus Bilvad. The only difference between now and the days of Mashiach is a change in government. And Shmuel is of the opinion that all this is natural change. It's things that happen naturally. There's no miracles. And the Gemara passes like Shmuel, which means that can the times of Mashiach be a fantastic time? Yes, it can be. But how do we have to live as Jews? We have to follow the halacha. The halacha is that it won't be that way. And therefore, yes, there are nevuahs that talk about bi'itay b'achisheno. Does Mashiach come in its time, or does it come suddenly? And that really boils down to the same halachos between Rav and Shmuel. Ultimately, because the Gemara passes like Shmuel, we have to operate like Shmuel, which means that we have to recognize that the process of the Gula is going to be a natural process. And this is not something unique already from the times of the Gemara, right? The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Kiva thought the Bar Kokhba was Mashiach. And as Rambam quotes about that Kufa in Hilchos Malachim at the end, he says that at no point in time did they ask Bar Kokhba to do any sort of miracle. They just believed that he was Mashiach because he was matching up to some of the nevuahs that were told. Again, it was 70 years after Chorban Bayis Sheni, the same 70 years that were after in between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, right? They fought, and Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim fought in the war to liberate Eretz Yisrael. Right, and we know this from Rav Shria Gaon because he actually his girsa of the famous Gemara in Yivamis of Shneim Aser Aleph Talmidim Hayelim Rabbi Kiva Mekivus the Tivris v'chula Meisu b'Shas Shmada. They all died during the time of Shmat. That's the girsa that Rav Shria Gaon has of that tkufa, which is again the tkufa of Sugya Sa'imer between Pesach and Shavuos, was when the main battle of the Bar Kokhba revolt took place. Now, of course, they thought Bar Kokhba was Mashiach, so they all fought in this battle. Now, if Mashiach is supposed to be this magic, fairy tale land, then why would they fight in the battle? They should just let it happen. Clearly, we have to operate within the rules of Teva. Now, another thing, Geula, in its strict form, is never the end of the process, but it is in fact the beginning of the process. Look at it when we're talking about Stei Achuza, when we're talking about other areas of Geula throughout the Torah. They're not talking about the end process, but rather the start of a process. Right? For example, Stei Achuza, right? A person owns their ancestral nachala, and they run out of money, and they have to sell it. So they sell it. Now it's up to the relatives to beguile that area, to redeem it. Once they redeem it, then they have to work the land. They have to cultivate the land, right? In fact, when Am Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael with Yeshua, that was the period of the Geula, and yet it still took 14 years of fighting all the enemies and clearing out the land and dividing up the land. And even still, even the Geula itself, as we know, as Yerushalmi says, kima kima ba Geula, slowly the Geula comes. It's a process, sort of like the dawn, as the dawn slowly breaks over the horizon and it gets brighter and brighter until the sun shines. That's the process of the Geula too. And as Chazal set up the Seder Tefillah that we daven every morning, and every Shemoneh Esrei 3 times a day, to match the Seder of the Geula as they saw it, which starts off with Baruch Hashanim. First, Eretz Yisrael starts to give off fruit. Then comes Tekah B'Shofar. Am Yisrael returns in mass to Eretz Yisrael. Then comes the Shiva Shofteinu, the establishment of a state, of a government that is supposed to do V'al Mashinim and Al Tzadikim, to punish the Rishayim and to raise up the Tzadikim. And then comes Yerushalayim Ercha, the return to Yerushalayim. And only after that comes the Tzemach David, right? So part of the bracha of Yerushalayim, Uvinei Isa B'kar B'Yaminu Binyan Eilam, we actually have to build a Beis HaMikdash, and only after do we have a Beis HaMikdash comes Mashiach. And this is why the Yerushalmi says that there's a opinion in the Yerushalmi that Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt before the coming of Mashiach. Again, another reason that we go to HaBayis is to hopefully bring ourselves closer to this idea that we could build a Beis HaMikdash. We're only going to have freedoms to bring karbanos and to build Beis HaMikdash is if we actually go. If we avoid it, then we're not going to end up with any freedoms there. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Obviously, it's very brief. We don't have the time.
No, it's great. You're really packing so much here. And I just saw maybe one sort of last question as we wrap up here, which is that, I think a lot of things that you've said probably, and you even alluded to this before, are not necessarily so accepted within some of the yeshivas and the circles where you come from and you learned in. You even now basically alluded pretty explicitly to the importance of having an army and defending ourselves, and that's obviously a very painful sugya for many people. Especially people, like families, people have lost loved ones, and there are people are taking to the streets, and you were stuck in traffic because people take to the streets because not going to the army. So I'm wondering, have you experienced tensions, conflicts, hate in various shapes or forms for the opinions that you've developed, the Torah that you've come to believe in?
Of course. I mean, I alluded to the fact that I had made the mistake of sharing this in, in Yeshivas Mir, and I remember a certain Reish Chabur there called me a apikairis for even suggesting that one should go to HaBayis. And mind you, I wasn't going to HaBayis at that time. It was actually really funny because years later, I was on the Har and I saw the one of the people who learned on the same bench as me in the Mir on the Har. I'm like, you go to HaBayis? He's like, of course I go. I've been going for years. And I'm like, so you mean when I was being yelled at as the Abikaris for suggesting going to HaBayis, you were already going to HaBayis and you were sitting there and you just kept your mouth shut? And he's like, yep. Well, that was actually an interesting thing. But yeah, and the there are certain rabbanim who were not fans of what I was doing and made their displeasure known and made it uncomfortable for me. But at the end of the day, what I learned from my Rabbi Meltzer was that Torah is emes, and we don't worry. It's our job is to do what the Torah says and what halacha says. And if we're going to be afraid of everybody and not serve Hashem, then where does that lead to? Right? The first halach on Shulchan Aruch, to rise like a lion to serve Hashem and not to be afraid of any person. So yes, is it difficult sometimes? Yeah, it's difficult. To people call me names. Yeah, of course they do. But at the end of the day, I have to. One thing is true. If the Torah says it's emes, then it's emes, and that's what we do.
Beautiful. I really appreciate all these ideas and the fact that you've done all this learning and all this activism, l'shem shamayim, while also having a career and producing content, Torah content, other content is really tremendous. I really appreciate you joining us. Well enough with with our rapid fire round, 3 short questions, 3 short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
What I like to do with my time, it would be nice to sleep, but more often than not, I'm watching my kids.
Wonderful. What's your favorite sefer on Parshat Shavua?
My favorite sefer on Parshas Shavua is Chumash.
Amazing. And finally, if you were forced to leave all your projects that you're doing now, all the jobs that you're doing to make up Parnassa and the activism that you're currently involved in, found some other profession, some other job, maybe something you'd had dreamed of doing as a kid, what you could choose anything in the world that you wanted, what would it be?
Meaning, what type of job would I want if I had it? Oh, probably just doing what I'm doing already now. I love what I'm doing.
Amazing. Rav Yehuda Levy, thank you so much for joining us. We should all have Gula Shlema Bakaro.
Oh, man.